Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israeli coronavirus restrictions coming back again. Meanwhile, Israel tasking the UN and EU nations with administering the relief in the Gaza Strip. And finally, Israeli researchers may have found the solution to the globe's organ transplant crisis. The only major question that remains is it kosher? To begin, unfortunately, coronavirus making its way back to the top of our show today. The increasingly rampant Delta variant doubling its spread here in Israel. So Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and the Health Ministry working feverishly to nip it in the bud before infection rates return to their worst. ILTV's Chana Rifkin with more.
An upcoming coronavirus cabinet meeting set for Thursday to discuss the return of previously lifted restrictions, and all in hopes of slowing the spread of the infamously infectious Delta variant. And this as active cases doubled over the past 2 weeks, including over 60,000 people currently in isolation. Possible restrictions also including limits on large gatherings, the reinstatement of the Green Pass system, and the requirement of even vaccinated parents with COVID-positive children to isolate until receiving a negative test. The current statistics putting the infection rate at 0.7%, and as of Monday morning, there are 343 new cases, bringing the active number of infections to 2,597, with 35 in serious condition, and the death toll now at 6,428. That said, there is reason to stay hopeful. Outgoing Health Ministry Director General Chazi Levy saying, quote, "We're not close to what we've seen in the past, and it's nothing like the caseload we've had earlier." Though experts at Hebrew University in Jerusalem claiming that if no further actions are taken to rein in the outbreak, Israel could once again see 1,000 new infections per day within the next 2 weeks. Bennett again pleading with citizens to cooperate and for parents of children 12 through 16 to continue getting vaccinated, especially as tens of thousands of vaccine doses near their expiration date.
שבוע שעבר אנחנו קראנו לנוער מגיל 12 ועד 16 להגיע להתחסן, ואני שמח לבשר שכבר 100,000 בני נוער בגילאים האלה התחסנו בזריקה הראשונה. הקצב היומי של בני הנוער זינק פי 6 תוך שבוע. רוצה להודות לשר הבריאות בעניין. אבל זה לא מספיק, זה לא מספיק. שעון החול הולך ואוזל. כל מי שעוד לא התחסן מתבקש לקבוע כבר היום תור. החיסונים עובדים. החיסון השני הוא קריטי. נגד הזן החדש, זן הדלטה, זה עובד.
Bennett also reportedly in constant contact with Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla about replenishing Israel's supply of vaccines and negotiating deals for vaccine exchanges between Israel and other countries. Likewise, the government mulling Moderna's vaccine to substitute Pfizer's second doses to those over the age of 18 until supplies are renewed. And while Health Ministry data revealing that though Pfizer's vaccine appears to be only 64% effective in containing the spread of the Delta variant, it still is over 90% effective in protecting against the majority of serious cases and hospitalizations of the Delta variant. Alternative studies in Israel also proving that the vaccine can be up to 80% effective against blocking the Delta variant all in all. This going to show that regardless of its effectiveness, getting vaccinated is still better than not. Chana Rifkin, ILTV.
Meanwhile, in Gaza, as ceasefire negotiations between Israel and the Hamas terror group continue, aid for the sake of reconstruction is starting to flow into the Strip, and primarily aid money coming in from Qatar. However, in efforts to ensure that the money and aid materials actually make it to average Gazan citizens as opposed to the Hamas terror group, the United Nations has agreed to govern how the funds are dispersed. Further, Israel is reportedly seeking additional donations from European countries. In any case, here to discuss is CEO of the International Legal Forum, attorney Arsen Ostrovsky. Thank you so much for being with us. Now, how would you describe the situation in Gaza today?
Well, thank you for having me on, first of all. The situation in Gaza right now, I think there's a sense of calm that has taken place after the devastating conflict we had in May between Hamas and Israel. So the ceasefire is beginning to hold place, which is a positive thing. The question now becomes what next, and how do we ensure that this sense of stability and calm is long-term and is durable, and is one that also takes into account not just the needs of the people of Gaza, but also importantly the security needs for the state of Israel, given Hamas's ongoing control of the Gaza Strip and ongoing acts of terror, I would add as well, even after the ceasefire, albeit intermittent, as what we're seeing with the incendiary balloon attacks at the moment as well. But right now, all the attention is, as you suggested, in looking at the reconstruction of Gaza, how that aid money will be flowing in and under what conditions.
So now let's talk about that aid itself. How far will the Qatari aid actually go? How much more is necessary to make a real difference in the Strip?
Look, that's a good question. How much money is needed? That's a very open-ended question. It is obviously quite a significant amount, given the state of Gaza and the conditions under which it is at the moment. That said, from Israel's perspective, it is certainly in Israel's interest for there to be calm in Gaza and for Gaza to be in a stable situation. The concern, however, becomes the money that does flow in, and as we've noted a significant amount of that in the tens of millions from Qatar, is to ensure that that money actually gets to the people of Gaza and not to Hamas, where it can subsequently be used for acts of terror, for incitement, for rebuilding their arms and terror tunnels and so on. So from Israel's perspective, I think it is happy for aid to come in, and certainly to increase the pool of money so that Gaza is not relying only on Qatar, but also on others in the international community, including in the EU, including through the United Nations. But for there to be two things. One, for there to be some kind of mechanisms in place to ensure that that money does go to the people of Gaza and not end up in the hands of Hamas and where it can be used for acts of terror, number one. And number two, Israel is looking to tie in any aid that does go in to be conditional in some respects on the retrieval of the Israelis that are being held captive by the Hamas, with two civilians and also the bodies of two soldiers as well. So for that to also form part of the equation.
All right, well, as you've hinted, the United Nations and EU have a bad track record, like Hamas funding, allowing money to go to pay for slay, UNRWA education materials, including hate and glorification of terror, weapons found in UN-affiliated offices and schools. So what safeguards are there or will there be to ensure that the aid goes to where it needs to go? How can we trust that the EU and the UN aid will be better conditioned than it was in the past?
Look, that's a great question, and I think those details are being worked out at the moment. There are certainly a lot of concerns at the moment. We've seen a lot of money that has come from the EU that has ultimately been used by the Palestinian Authority and others for payment of salaries of terrorists. We have seen various UN agencies, including UNRWA, taking the money that's purportedly supposed to be allocated for purposes of education and other welfare means that has ultimately ended up, again, in the hands of Hamas, for which they've used for whether it's replenishing the rocket arsenal or working on tunnels or for other acts of terror. So that's a great question, and I would hope that is certainly a primary concern, as I'm sure it is, in terms of how to ensure that money ultimately goes to the people of Gaza and not end up in the hands of Hamas. There are a number of ways that can be done. There are a number of multilateral agencies that money can go, for example, to particular projects, which is important, and not to, for example, to the leadership of the Hamas or the PA, where we know that it can be used for other purposes. There can be observers, for example, monitoring in terms of how that money is divided and for what needs and purposes it is going to as well. So there's a number of different possibilities that can be put in place. But I think from Israel's perspective, it has taken a line where it has essentially said that it will not allow for any more blank checks coming in, whether it's from Qatar, from other places into Gaza, and they can ultimately be used by Hamas in the end for committing acts of terror against the state of Israel.
So how involved is Israel in creating these safeguards with these other donor countries and organizations?
Well, I mean, Israel's involved to a very intricate level. In the coming days, there will be a meeting of the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee, which is the group of the international community, specifically from the EU and other countries as well, whose primary focus is the issue of the reconstruction of Gaza. Israel is very much an active participant in that. And from what I understand also, that the Israeli government is in negotiations both with the EU and also with the UN and its different agencies to discuss how to get that money to for those purposes that it is needed for, and not funneled for use of terror, violence, and incitement. So Israel certainly has a strong interest in maintaining the calm. It wants Gaza to be obviously not just peace with the people of Gaza, but for Gaza to be economically stable and for the people there to have the opportunity to thrive. But that can only happen if the money goes towards them and not into the hands of Hamas.
All right, Arsen Ostrovsky, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Moving on, Lebanon suffering from the worst economic collapse in the country's history, compounded by coronavirus, the explosion at the Beirut port last August, and what international experts are calling inadequate government action. Half the population now in poverty, as the value of Lebanon's currency falling by over 90% in the past 2 years alone. Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz then now offering aid to the Lebanese, despite the technical state of hostilities between these two neighboring countries. Now, there are still no details as to what the aid might include, nor whether Lebanon would accept it. But taking to Twitter, Gantz is writing that, as an Israeli, a Jew, and a human being, his heart goes out to the hungry people of Lebanon. And Gantz adds that Israel is ready to act with assistance as it has in the past, while encouraging other countries to follow suit, especially as violence and protests are breaking out amid the breakdown in basic services in Lebanon, including massive shortages in electricity and fuel.
موجود هون ببيروت صرنا هلا نحن عم نعاني بهالفتره الازمه كثير كبيره عم تشد اكثر لقدام العالم بعد ما يعملوا حل سلمي انه يلاقوا له شيء شغله لا بالعكس كلياتنا عم نصف الطوابير مثل كانه نحن قوم حمير فمعلش سامحوني من التعبير بعد شوي حركب جوانح وطير.
The World Bank now listing Lebanon as a, quote, fragility, conflict, and violence state, meaning concerns are mounting that the conditions may soon become so dire that they risk becoming, quote, systemic national failings with regional and potentially global effects. Now, in other news, the family reunification law coming up for a vote today after being twice delayed due to the lack of votes needed to pass the law. And according to reports from this morning, the vote failed to pass in the organizing committee again as well. This despite the right-wing part of the coalition trying to adjust the law in order to get the left-wing parties to compromise on it. Meanwhile, all this has controversy brewing between Israel's interior and defense ministries over evolving policies in the West Bank. So joining us to better understand these issues is ILTV reporter Asaf Nissan. Asaf, thank you so much for joining us. Now, I need to ask, does the loss of the organizing committee mean the end of the reunification law?
No. It does mean that now it will go to the plenum and over there it will be decided. But overall, the law itself is not lost, since we all see the different responses coming out from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Interior Ministry, from the opposition, saying that despite the law fell in the organizing committee, it doesn't mean it's over.
So what is its current status? How might it be passed? What's going on with the opposition regarding the law?
So regarding the law itself, it's still sitting on the table right now, being decided whether in the plenum or whether through the different options, whether it will be the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that takes of specific humanitarian issues. The opposition also saying that Sheked herself, despite the law, if it won't pass, could still limit it in order to keep the national security issue on the table. Bennett himself is still banking on the fact that the opposition, mostly based on the right wing, will actually vote together and come together to stop this law from falling apart and helping the state itself keep defending itself from different enemies from outside and within.
All right, well, certainly for right now, the opposition seems to be towing the party line under opposition leader, former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, so we'll see how that plays out in the future. On another note, though, we've heard of controversy, and we mentioned it earlier, coming out about between the Ministry of Defense and Minister Benny Gantz and Interior Minister Ayelet Shaked from the Yamina Party. This regarding building in the West Bank. What exactly has been going on there?
So what's been going on is Shaked has been coming out with declarations to the Yesha Council, which is the organizing organizations in charge in the entire West Bank, saying that they're going to try to approve every 3 months construction in the West Bank through the Ministry of Defense. While Gantz himself and the ministry declined those allegations. Well, not allegations, but rumors, since they're saying that at the end of the day, they haven't said anything that will be agreed yet.
So Gantz, he's flat out saying, we never talked about this. I don't know what you're saying.
He's saying, I don't know what we're talking about. This is pretty much new to me. I don't know how to deal with it.
How is this conflict going to affect policy in the West Bank going forward?
Well, it's been an issue since day one. I mean, we knew this coalition is going to be different since we have two opposites ends of the political spectrum. We have the left-wing parties such as Labor, Meretz, and the Arab parties. And on the right hand, we have Gideon Sa'ar and Naftali Bennett pretty much going forward, and blue and white split in the middle. So it wouldn't be a surprise. There's going to be a lot of controversy around the West Bank. I mean, the building, security issues, road construction, everything is going to be very, very versatile, very hard, despite the fact that I think that, let's say, some of the issues, let's say construction, not necessarily in the settlements, but let's say more roads and infrastructure would probably be passed on a bigger range due to the fact that you have both civilizations living there, Arab and Israelis.
All right, so the bottom line of this quick answer, the tachlis, as they say in Hebrew, will the coalition survive, moving into the future, given the seemingly growing fissures between all these parties?
I think it's too soon to say anything else. I mean, we had coalitions like that in the past that were unity governments, and they succeeded the 4 years. Everyone's still bent on the whole era of Netanyahu pretty much leading a whole narrow government on the one hand and no real opposition on the other. So there isn't much to say yet. Whether or not it will go or it won't go, will it fall? Only days will tell.
All right, Asaf Nissan, thank you so much as always.
Thank you so much.
Now, as Americans marked Independence Day in the United States on Sunday, Israeli leaders from the new coalition sent their congratulations to their allies and friends across the states. One Israeli official in particular, however, missed the mark, and unfortunately in spectacular fashion. I suspect that by this time on Sunday, an intern somewhere in Israel was likely fired. In a since-deleted tweet, Israeli Foreign Minister and alternate Prime Minister Yair Lapid sending his best wishes to the United States, saying that Washington has no better friend than Jerusalem and vice versa. But there are two glaring issues with his post. First, the American flag on the bottom right, you may have noticed, is displayed upside down, which many consider to be disrespectful, especially since, according to United States flag code, this should never be done except as a sign of dire distress. Then second, in a more subtle but no less embarrassing inclusion, the small flag at the end of the text is not that of the United States at all, but rather it's that of Liberia, as pointed out on social media by eagle-eyed users. And this just days after Lapid was heavily criticized for allegedly snubbing major investors in the United Arab Emirates as well. Moving on, Israel's tourism industry among the many taking a huge hit during the pandemic. But the tourism ministry is already canceling its ad campaign launched last month to encourage locals to go on summer vacations. And the reason? They just cannot justify the enormous hikes in pricing. While vowing to address the issue, Tourism Minister Yoel Razvazov saying, "I don't see a reason to continue the campaign while the prices of vacations are so high. Quote, it's a pity to waste public funds on this, and vacations are not just for the rich." With me to talk about the problem is Assistant Professor and Economic Consumer Behavior Expert, Billy Abraham. Billy, thanks as well for coming on to the program again. What is the current average price now per night in a hotel in Israel for a family?
For the average Israeli family, let's say 4 parents and 2 kids, it'll cost $1,000 a night, which is very, very high. And regardless whether you're planning to stay in Eilat or Tel Aviv, it's just about $1,000 per night.
Are these price hikes justified in any way? What are the factors that are contributing to these costs?
Well, if you look at the hotel industry, capacity, I mean, the hotels are booked to their full capacity. And, according to economics, Eco 101, as supply is higher than demand, and prices increase. Demand is really, really high in the sky. And the main reason to explain it is because a lot of Israelis are concerned over international travel. They're afraid of coming back and being infected with COVID-19, needing to quarantine. So this really deters them from going abroad, and that's why they're willing to pay practically any price to travel domestically, which is good for the economy.
Well, I mean, okay, so it's good for the economy, get some money going. I agree with you there, of course. That's also Econ 101, as I'm sure you know. But if Israelis are willing to pay just about any price just to get out of the house, is the tourism industry just trying to screw local tourists? Are they fleecing them for all they can?
Well, I don't think so, because if you look at the capacity, it's just that, as demand increases, prices increase very much. By the way, if you look at the United States and around the world, prices are very high. If you look at the airlines who have increased prices considerably, it's just that, in business, the higher the price you can get, the higher you want to get. I mean, there's no reason why they should lower prices. However, I know that the Ministry of Tourism is trying to decrease prices somehow, but it's a problem because if you look at bookings, you cannot book a room in a hotel until around September, October. So it means that even if the Ministry of Tourism steps in order to try to decrease prices, people will be able to get lower prices only in about 3 or 4 months, not now. I mean, hotels are completely booked. People are not even thinking about canceling.
Okay, so again, I mean, we mentioned a little bit of the trends that you're expecting. How long will these price hikes remain? Will they go down, or are they here to stay as part and parcel to the effects of COVID on the economy, like raising VAT and other taxes to pay for all the pandemic time grants?
Well, I would say that probably prices will decrease after the holidays around October, only to increase again later on in 2022. However, if you look at in general in the long run, I think that prices will continue increasing as long as we have not put an end to the pandemic. As long as consumers are concerned of international travel, there will be high demand for Israeli hotels, and prices will continue to increase, although they might decrease somewhat. They'll go up and down, but overall higher than last year, definitely.
I think I speak for everyone when I say I hope the prices fall quickly. Billy, thank you so much for joining us.
So, it was a pleasure.
If you'd like to see more of my interview with Billy Abraham, consumer behavior expert, please check out on our ILTV website at iltv.tv or go to ILTV's YouTube or Facebook channels. Now, our final story tonight, a breakthrough in the field of human organ transplantation, hybrid animal-human organs. And they could just be the solution to both the global shortage of transplant organs as well as to the risk of implant rejection or graft versus host disease. A team of Israeli researchers under Dr. Shachar Cohen at Beilinson Hospital revealing that they've successfully developed a pig organ with human blood vessels, where the human vessel coating is the point of contact between the graft and its recipient. And the result being an animal organ that is far less likely to be rejected by human hosts. As for how this feat was done, Cohen explains that they removed the lining of the pig organ's blood vessels and replaced them with a human layer engineered in a lab from human placenta cells. And why placenta, you ask? Well, Cohen explains that the placenta is in fact the ideal organ as it naturally connects to human beings by maintaining the bonds between mother and fetus. Finally, so far, the successful experiments have all been conducted ex vivo or outside the body, and they include a hybrid heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, and more. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Chana Rifkin.
Well, wishing you a merry Monday despite the partly cloudy weather, although I must say it's a nice break. Now for tonight, meteorologists calling for lows in the 20s for the most part, and tomorrow, temperature highs expecting to be in the 30s. And now back to Aaron in the studio.
All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.26 shekels to the American dollar and 2.64 shekels to the Canadian dollar. Finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.